I often wondered how would Star Trek Voyager's computer graphics scene look like now with today's tech, specifically within the context of Blender and its unbelievably amazing renderer. So, I set out to do just that. Please forgive my amateur skills or perhaps even the lack thereof. I'm just some guy that wanted to speculate on what could be. Is Star Trek Voyager primed for a re-render with modern tech, specifically with the amazing Blender renderer? You decide. Initially, this video was structured to be quite lengthy, as I set out to explain a list of innovations that has happened since that led to the drastic improvements in CG visuals that we are accustomed to now, like HDRI lighting, accurate volumetric visual interpretations, automatic cinematic color workflows tech, and more. But for both of our sanity's sake, I'm going to narrow it down to the top 2 techs that, in my opinion, hadn't been available back then. Just these 2 techs alone would have drastically improved the look of Voyager by a significant amount. Let's go. Voyager featured a few interior CG shots during its run, and it must have been a challenge for the team to pull off miracles after miracles. You see, before global illumination implementations became commonplace, CG artists often struggles to achieve any convincing sense of realism when lighting interior scenes. That's why everything have to be dark or in the shadow if possible. If possible. I'll be using a very low poly scene created by Mr. Robin Butler to illustrate the point, and I hope Mr. Robin will forgive me as I defile his low poly work by adding textures to it. Say the ship had landed on the planet to do some maintenance. Maybe because it's damaged or something, I don't know. Cause then I'll get to put in some vegetations. I love doing that because I presumed it would have been a logistic nightmare back then, though I could be wrong. This is how the scene looked like now with today's 3D technology in Blender. And the only thing that will give it away that it is computer graphic is that it is too clean. There is no real scratches anywhere. No damages, no chip corners, but that's precisely the point. It is the lighting itself that provided the realism all on its own. Global illumination simulates the bouncing of lights as it reflects off various surfaces in the scene. Let's try to light up this scene using the technology available during Star Trek Voyager's production era. This is not a simulation using today's renderer. This is an actual render done by a renderer of that era. Notice the very obvious computer graphic look, what we will now coin as the retro or vintage CGI look. It's very obvious, glaring, and in-your-face fake. You don't have to be told that it's computer graphic, you know. Now, of course, to be fair, if time is spent putting enough point lights in an environment, it is possible to simulate a pathetic rendition of global illumination. A very bad simulation of it. So, let's do that. But notice no matter how hard one try, The fakeness of the lighting always comes through. That computer graphic look is always in your face. I had a chance to talk to Mr. Kevin, who actually worked in Star Trek Voyager's CG department, and this is what he has to say when I asked him whether Global Illumination was available to the production team at the time. And now it's time to talk about the number one reason why modern computer graphics look so real and so consistent no matter what kind of crazy lighting situations it finds itself in. To everyone who remember playing 3D games in the early 90s, there is a point during your lifetime as a gamer where you must have distinctively noticed how all of a sudden, games just started to magically look 10 times better. Now check that, 100 times or more better. I'm not saying the gameplay, just the visuals. Even during the era where real-time ray tracing and global illumination was not a thing yet, there was still a distinct period and sharp jump where everything just suddenly looked way better. What happened? What gives? During the dark, primitive era of computer graphics material implementations, even after the artists have carefully set the shader, specular, glossiness, texture, Fresnel, and so on and so forth to get a material to look right, that particular material will usually only be good for a particular scene or scenes that share a similar lighting setup. And since the Voyager ship is often seen in space, once the materials has been properly adjusted to conform to generic space scenes, it is good to go. The problem comes when the ship is in any other environment that isn't mostly space. I won't go into the technicals of PBR material technology. Suffice to say, it is a way of making sure that 3D materials stay relatively consistent with the material that they are trying to convey regardless of what environment they find themselves in, just like in real life. It is still a hack, and there are situations where it doesn't work, but it is the closest we have gotten thus far, and it is really good as it is. Much better than any hacks we have ever had before. As Mr. Kevin mentioned, global illumination was not available, and PBR material implementation would not exist for Lightwave, which is the software package that they use, until 2018. That's about 17 years after the last episode of Star Trek Voyager. And I didn't even mention HDRI lighting and PBR volumetric light interaction with realistic shadows, which is pretty much inconceivable in the past and would have had to be done with lots of CG trickery. So is Star Trek Voyager primed for a CG refresh re-render? You decide. Special thanks to Mr. Kevin, who actually worked on the show for helping me to share up some information regarding Star Trek Voyager's CG production pipeline. Mr. Kevin has a YouTube channel where he expresses his love for the retro Amiga computers, and you even get to hear him talk about how he did those Star Trek flybys in one of his videos. So, please check out his channel, which I'll be putting a link to in the description below. Next week, I'll be going back to my usual Blender 3D modeling and sculpting tutorials. This is Brace with Jack, and I'll see you next week. Bye. I should really learn Lightwave.